Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What is the best unexplained mystery? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. The murder of Julia Wallace. Wallace, aged 52, attended a meeting of the Liverpool Central Chess Club on the evening of Monday, January 1931, to play a scheduled chess game. While there, he was handed a message, which had been received by telephone about 25 minutes before he arrived. It requested that he call an address at 25 Menlove Gardens East, Liverpool, at 7:30 p.m. the following evening to discuss insurance with a man who had given his name as R.M. Qualtrough. The next night, Wallace duly made his way by tram car to the south of the city at the time requested, only to discover that while there were Menlove Gardens north, south, and west, there was no east. Wallace made inquiries in the nearby newsagents and also spoke to a policeman on his beat, but nobody he asked was able to help him in his search for the address of the mysterious Qualtrough. He also called 25 Menlove Gardens West and asked several other passers-by by the neighborhood for directions, but to no avail. After searching the district for about 45 minutes, he returned home. His next-door neighbors, the Johnstons, who were going out for the evening, encountered Wallace in the alley, complaining that he could not gain entry to his home at either the front or the back. While they watched, Wallace tried the back door again, which now opened. Inside, he found his wife Julia had been brutally beaten to death in their sitting room. Up to his arrest 2 weeks later, Wallace made 2 voluntary statements, but was never intensively questioned by the police, although he was required to attend a CID headquarters every day, and was asked specific questions about whether the Wallaces had had a maid, why he had asked the man who had taken the telephone message at the chess club to be specific about the time he took it, and whether he had spoken to anyone in the street on his way back to his house from his abortive attempt to find Mr. Qualtrough. The police had evidence that the telephone box used by Qualtrough to make his call to the chess club was situated just 400 yards from Wallace's home, although the person in the cafe who took the call was quite certain it was not Wallace on the other end of the line. Nevertheless, the police began to suspect that Qualtrough was William Herbert Wallace. Yet, even when they arrested and charged him, they did not ask him any further questions. The police were also convinced that it would have been possible for Wallace to murder his wife and still have time to arrive at the spot where he boarded his tram. They attempted to prove this by having a fit young detective go through the motions of the murder and then sprint all the way to the tram stop, something an ailing 52-year-old Wallace probably could not have accomplished. The original assessment of the time of death around 8 p.m. was also later changed to just after 6:30 p.m., although there was no additional evidence on which to base the earlier timing. Forensic examination of the crime scene had revealed that Julia Wallace's attacker was likely to have been heavily contaminated with her blood, given the brutal and frenzied nature of the assault. Wallace's suit, which he had been wearing on the night of the murder, was examined closely, but no trace of blood staining was found. The police formed the theory that a Macintosh, which was inexplicably found under Julia's corpse, had been used by a naked Wallace to shield himself from blood spatter while committing the crime. Examination of the bath and drains revealed that they had not been recently used, and there was no trace of blood there either, apart from a single tiny clot in the toilet pan, the origin of which could not be established. Probably my favorite unsolved mystery is the Island Moor Lighthouse mystery. Basically, the 3 lighthouse keepers disappeared from the island. Inside the lighthouse, they found uneaten meals on the table and missing coats, among other weird things. The creepy part is the logbook. It's supposed to be used strictly for logging work-related entries, but they started using it as a sort of journal or diary. It was explained in the logbook how there was a terrible storm that was lasting for many days, and that one of the keepers, an old weathered seaman, was crying in fear. The last entry said that the storm had ended and everything was calm and fine. A neighboring island reported that there was never a storm. The disappearance of Kiren Horman. Kiren, 9 years old in 2010, was allegedly dropped off at school by his stepmom but never made it to his first class. They never found any evidence of him and never charged the stepmother. For some reason, this story totally upsets me. The crew murders is a pretty good one. A farming couple were murdered and their bodies were dumped in a river. After they were missing for a week, their home was searched and their still living baby daughter was found there. The wife's father was convicted of the crime, but later released when it was discovered that the detective inspectors in charge of investigating had falsified evidence to implicate him. The actual murderer has never been identified. What makes it interesting is that doctors believe that during the week her parents were at the bottom of the river, weighted down with car parts, someone was regularly feeding the baby. Also, a really disturbing one that might be solved now. Who killed Katzina Zawada? Warning, this is not for the faint of heart. I'm dead serious. Do not read this before eating. She was a Polish college student, and thus most of the information is in Polish. There's not much information on her available in English, which is honestly a surprise given the details of the case. She went missing in November 1998. Then on January 7, 1999, something got caught in a tugboat's propeller, so the operator stopped it to try and handle it. He found something he described as pale and nondescript, with a really foul smell, and he couldn't tell what it was. Then he noticed an ear. He didn't find her body. He found her skin. It had been neatly cut off from her body around the thighs and neck, missing her arms and face, though still including her left ear. Investigators determined it had been in the river for 2 or 3 weeks by that point, and that it had been prepared to be worn like a suit. The rest of her body was never found aside from a leg found floating near a dam. One of the most horrifying and disturbing cases I've ever heard. The disappearance of Brandon Lawson. He left his home after an argument with his wife and was heading to his dad's home. He ran out of gas along the highway in Texas. He called his brother to bring him gas, and when his brother showed up, all he found was Brandon's truck parked haphazardly. Shortly before he disappeared, he also called 911, saying he was in a field and had ran into someone. They have yet to find any trace of him. We've covered this one on this page and many different topics, and it's still pretty fascinating. If you haven't looked up the case, you should. Peculiar and very tragic. I told this one before, but Rico Harris, he was a massive 6'9" former Harlem Globetrotter basketball player who had drug issues earlier in his life, but had made a full recovery, and was getting his life back on track. He was driving along California's Interstate I-5 from his home in Southern California to Seattle to live with his girlfriend. He was somewhere just north of Sacramento, exhausted, and told his girlfriend over the phone that he wanted to check out the mountains. All calls stopped since then. His car was found a couple days later by a patrolman near a rest stop in the mountains. A massive search was launched. No signs of him. The strangest part, a driver later reported seeing a massive 6'9" individual wandering down the highway just a mile from where the car was found a week later. The search was relaunched. Massive, size 17 footprints were found in the ground that were not there before. They were getting very close, and then nothing. No trace, no body, nothing. Where did Rico go the first time he disappeared? Where was he for an entire week? And where did he disappear to again? The fact that someone could disappear twice is what makes this so damn mystifying to me. The dancing plague of 1518 was a cause of dancing mania that occurred in Strasbourg in July 1518. Around 400 people took to dancing for days without rest, and over the period of about 1 month, some of those affected collapsed or even died of heart attack, stroke, or exhaustion. Historical documents, including physicians' notes, cathedral sermons, local and regional chronicles, and even notes issued in the Strasbourg City Council, are clear that the victims danced. It is not known why these people danced, some even to their deaths. So I have a personal experience, sort of. My father had a co-worker who was a great guy, good at his work, fun to talk to. Nobody had any complaints about him. He lived in an apartment right next to work, so the night watchman at the workplace would see him whenever he went out. So one night he went out in his pajamas, talking on his cell phone, nodded at the watchman. The watchman didn't think much of it. After all, it's not all that weird to take a walk, even though it was quite late. He didn't think much of it. The watchman didn't see him come back, but he figured he missed him when he went on his bathroom break, probably. But the guy didn't show up at work the next day. Someone from work went to check up, and he wasn't there. Nothing was disturbed. He was just gone. Everyone thought he had dropped dead, killed by thugs or an accident or some medical condition. The workplace filed a police report. Here's when it gets weird. It turns out the guy had created a fake identity. Any credentials he had given were fake. The references he had given never heard of him. The family address he'd given didn't exist. The police didn't find anything illegal in the apartment, but they didn't find anything that would give a clue as to who he was either. We moved away a few years ago, but I don't think the case was ever solved. It's definitely the best unexplained mystery that I've personally come across. The Enigma of Casper Hauser. I find the story of Casper Hauser, an anonymous teenager found wandering the streets of Nuremberg in the early 19th century, fascinating. He appeared out of nowhere with no family, friends, or anyone who could confirm his identity. He claimed to have been kept in almost total isolation for his whole life up until that point. His linguistic skills were severely limited, consistent with some who had grown up with very little human contact. Rumors began to circulate that he was actually a German prince who had been swapped at birth with a dead baby to prevent his succession to the throne by scheming relatives. Rather than kill him, they locked him up in complete isolation and left there to be forgotten until somehow he was freed or managed to escape. He attracted several wealthy sponsors over the course of his short life, but none were successful at solving the mystery of his origins. He died under suspicious circumstances, stabbed by an unknown assailant 5 years after being found. Of course, he may have just been a deranged fanaticist or attention seeker. Who knows? The disappearance of Asha Degree. She was a shy 9-year-old girl who randomly left her house around 2 a.m. on Valentine's Day 2000 in pouring rain. Her backpack was found later, but she never was. It's even stranger because some of the more common explanations for child disappearances don't apply here. For example, there was no computer in her house, so she couldn't have met some stranger who lured her out. She did well in school, and she had a supportive family. So none of the typical reasons children run away. She was also extremely afraid of dogs, so it was out of character for her to go walking around alone. There were never any real clues to her disappearance, and the trail went cold basically the day it happened. The lead mask mystery of Brazil. The bodies of 2 men found wearing lead masks covering their eyes with a notebook that mysteriously read 4:30 p.m. Be at the determined place. 6:30 p.m. Swallow capsules. And, after effect, protect metals. Wait for signal in Portuguese. The disappearance of Nicholas Barkley Frederick Bourdin. In 1994 San Antonio, Texas, 13-year-old Nicholas Barkley disappeared from his home. 3 years later, Barkley was found huddled next to a phone booth halfway across the world in Linares, Spain. Authorities picked him up and reunited him with his family. However, certain things didn't add up. Barkley had very little memory of what happened to him and couldn't give police a real answer as to how he ended up in Spain. Plus, his English was terrible, and when he did speak English, it was with a heavy accent. This doesn't make sense for someone who spent the first 13 years of his life in the United States, but these discrepancies were explained away by the fact that Barkley was probably just coping with the emotional trauma of being kidnapped to a foreign country and kept away from his family for 3 years. One thing no one could explain, though, was that when Nicholas returned to the United States, his eyes were a different color than when he originally disappeared. Barkley tried to resume a normal life, enrolling back into his old school, moving back in with his family, etc. About 4 months after reuniting with his family, a private investigator discovered that Nicholas Barkley actually wasn't Barkley, but a con artist named Frederick Bourdin. Bourdin was wanted by Interpol because he had a habit of stealing the identity of missing youths. Bourdin was arrested, but this brought about even more disturbing questions about Nicholas's disappearance. Apparently, Nicholas was a very unruly and problematic child. He was always getting into trouble at school, and there were several police reports from his family's house about domestic disturbances and arguments that worsened in the months before he went missing. Nicholas's mom moved her brother into their house, Nicholas's uncle, shortly before he disappeared to help give Nicholas some structure. It is rumored that he couldn't handle Nicholas and instead killed him. This would explain why the family was so willing to accept someone who wasn't their son as their lost boy. If it was believed that Nicholas was alive, any murder investigation would come to a halt. Even more interesting, after Bourdin was arrested, police began reopening and investigating the case. Nicholas's uncle promptly killed himself. The disappearance of Terrence William and Felipe Santos. Terrence Williams and Felipe Santos went missing in 2004 and 2003 respectively under similar circumstances in Naples, Florida. Both men were last seen being arrested by former Collier County Sheriff's Deputy Corporal Steve Calkins for driving without a license. He claims he changed his mind about both arrests and last saw the men after he dropped them at a Circle K convenience stores. Actor Tyler Perry offered a $100,000 reward for any information leading to the location of the men or leading to an arrest in the case. Al Sharpton of the NAACP also joined Perry in raising awareness of the cause. The 1962 Alcatraz escape. I really hope they managed to escape even though they were criminals, because I don't think they ever injured anybody. I'm very interested in crime that requires smart thinking and where nobody gets injured by the criminals.